You are a Roman guard posted outside a stone chamber sealed tight in Alexandria. Behind that door is Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, Pharaoh, descendant of the Ptolemies, and the most powerful woman of the ancient world. She has been confined inside for 7 days. From time to time, you hear her, not sobbing, not shouting, just the sound of movement, quiet footsteps echoing against stone, the soft whisper of fabric shifting, and now and then her voice, speaking as though another person were present, even though you know without question that she is alone. Before continuing, there is something crucial you need to understand about Cleopatra's death. Everything you think you know about it is wrong. The famous tale of an asp hidden among figs is almost certainly a myth. The image of Cleopatra passing peacefully in her royal bed, attended by faithful handmaidens, is just as likely a fabrication. What truly unfolded inside those sealed chambers between August 1st and August 12th, 30 BC, was far more intentional, far more methodical, and far more revealing about how Rome dismantled its enemies. This is not a story of suicide. It is the account of a calculated psychological campaign, engineered to shatter the final pharaoh of Egypt before allowing her to die. The real mystery is not how Cleopatra died. It is why Octavian required her death to follow a precise script, and why he needed 10 days to achieve it. If understanding how power operates at its most controlled and deliberate level matters to you, consider subscribing. This channel exists to uncover the mechanisms of domination that shaped ancient civilizations, truths romanticized history prefers to bury. Now, let me show you what actually happened during Cleopatra's final 10 days alive. The unraveling began on August 1st, 30 BC. Inside the tomb Cleopatra had built for herself, Mark Antony was dying. He had fallen upon his own sword after being falsely told that Cleopatra was already dead. But she was not. Instead, she had sealed herself inside the tomb with her 2 most loyal handmaidens, taking with her as much treasure as she could carry. The tomb stood near the temple of Isis. The tomb itself was a solid structure of stone, rising 2 stories high. Its massive wooden doors offered no easy entry, no weak points, built like a fortress, because Cleopatra understood that death would demand the same defenses she had insisted on in life. At the base of the tomb, Antony was bleeding to death. His men pleaded with Cleopatra to open the doors. She refused. She couldn't take the risk. Octavian's soldiers were only minutes away. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra and her attendants lowered ropes from the upper level and hauled Antony upward through a high opening in the stone, pulling him inside while he was still alive. As they dragged him upward, his blood streaked the walls below. Picture that moment. The Queen of Egypt straining to pull her dying lover into her tomb because opening the doors would mean capture. Antony died in her arms on the upper level of the chamber. His final words, as recorded by Plutarch, were not words of regret, "Do not pity me in this final turn of fate. I was the greatest of Romans, defeated only by another Roman." He died believing his life had mattered. Cleopatra had only moments to mourn before Octavian's forces arrived. But Octavian did not attack the tomb. He did not smash the doors or force his way inside. Instead, he sent a messenger, Gaius Proculus. The message was brief and calculated. Caesar wished to discuss terms of surrender and the future of her children. Cleopatra still refused to open the doors. She spoke to Proculus through a narrow opening in the stone, insisting she would negotiate only if Octavian guaranteed her children's safety. While she spoke, Proculus's men were scaling the outer walls. They slipped inside through the same opening used to pull Antony into the tomb just hours earlier. They caught her completely off guard. Cleopatra reached beneath her clothing for a hidden dagger and tried to end her life. But the soldiers were prepared. They lunged at her, knocked the blade away, pinned her down, and restrained her. According to Cassius Dio, Cleopatra screamed as they seized her. "You will not take me alive to Rome. You will not parade me. Kill me now." But the soldiers had strict orders. She was to be kept alive, whatever force it took. Under no circumstances was she to be allowed to die. They carried her out of the tomb, moved her to the palace, and locked her inside a guarded chamber on the second floor. That moment, August 1st, marked the beginning of the real destruction. Octavian did not merely want Cleopatra dead. He needed her death to serve a very specific purpose. And achieving that purpose required time. Egypt, the richest kingdom in the ancient world, now belonged to him. But back in Rome, Octavian faced a dangerous dilemma. He had just won a civil war, Romans killing Romans, citizens spilling the blood of citizens. That kind of victory needed justification. So he reframed it. He had to turn a civil war into something more acceptable, a war against a foreign enemy. A war against a powerful Eastern queen who had corrupted Mark Antony and threatened Rome itself. The problem was that Cleopatra didn't fit the role. She wasn't a barbarian. She was educated, fluent in multiple languages, politically astute. She had lived in Rome, spoken Latin, met senators, and negotiated with Cicero. Romans knew she wasn't a monster, and that made her dangerous. Complex enemies don't work well as propaganda. Octavian needed to reduce her, to strip away her reality and turn her into a symbol. The Eastern seductress. The Egyptian sorceress. A foreign corruption that had to be erased for Rome to endure. Above all, he needed her alive. He needed to march her through the streets of Rome in chains. Cleopatra understood exactly what that meant, and she would rather die than allow it. Octavian had 10 days to make sure she didn't. The Roman people had to witness her defeat. Her humiliation. Her collapse. Roman triumphs followed a rigid script. A conquered king or queen was dragged through the city in chains, put on display before the crowd, publicly degraded, and, once the parade ended, typically executed in the Tullianum prison. This ritualized humiliation was how Rome celebrated dominance. Octavian's entire political future rested on that spectacle. Cleopatra, alive and paraded through Rome, was meant to be proof that he had conquered the East itself. But Cleopatra knew the script. She had seen triumphs before. She had been in Rome in 44 BC during Caesar's Gallic triumph. She had watched as Vercingetorix, the Gallic king, was hauled through the streets in chains and later strangled in the Tullianum. She knew exactly what Octavian had planned for her. Two wills stood directly opposed. 10 days to resolve the struggle. This was how Octavian approached it. The chamber chosen for Cleopatra's confinement was no accident. Second floor of the palace. One door. One narrow window, far too small for escape. Guards posted outside at all hours. Anything remotely dangerous was removed. No knives. No daggers. No ropes. Nothing sharp. Nothing she could use to harm herself. According to Plutarch, her clothing and even her hair were inspected every single day. They searched for concealed weapons. For poison. For anything she might use to end her life. Cleopatra was left with only simple garments and isolated in an empty stone room. But Octavian's strategy went far beyond physical containment. He didn't just need to keep her alive. He needed to destroy her desire to die. Think about the psychology. Cleopatra wanted death because death meant dignity. Death meant control. Death meant Octavian could never display her in chains. So Octavian had to invert that instinct. He had to make survival feel necessary. And to do that, he targeted the one thing she could not relinquish, her children. Cleopatra had 4. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, was 17. The twins, Alexander Aelios and Cleopatra Selene, were 10. And the youngest, Ptolemy, just 6, was Mark Antony's. Octavian's men separated them from her immediately. They were moved to different areas of the palace, each kept under guard. On August 2nd, the day after Cleopatra's capture, Octavian sent another messenger. Not Proculus this time, but Gaius Cornelius Gallus, poet, soldier, diplomat. The message was precise, measured, elegant in its cruelty. Caesar wished her to know that her children were being well cared for. Their future depended entirely on your cooperation. Should anything happen to you, Caesar cannot guarantee their safety. Caesarion, in particular, is in a very vulnerable position. Cleopatra understood instantly. Caesar was the biological son of Julius Caesar. That fact alone made him a threat to Octavian, whose authority depended on his status as Caesar's adopted heir. If Cleopatra died, Caesar would be left exposed. He would be killed. But if she lived, if she cooperated, submitted, allowed herself to be used, then there was a chance Caesar might survive. Maybe all of her children would. That was the trap. Octavian gave Cleopatra a reason to live that directly opposed her reason to die. Her dignity demanded death. Her children demanded survival. For the next 10 days, Cleopatra lived inside that impossible choice. Suspended between dignity and motherhood. On August 3rd, the pressure intensified. Octavian sent architects to her chamber. They arrived carrying measuring rods, marked ropes, and wax tablets for notes. They measured her height, estimated her weight, recorded the dimensions of her body. According to Plutarch, drawing from the testimony of one of Cleopatra's surviving handmaidens, the queen asked what they were doing. Preparing for Caesar's triumph, one of the architects replied. The display must be properly constructed to accommodate you. Think about that moment. They measured her like an object. Like furniture. Like a figure meant to be built into a structure. They weren't just taking measurements. They were delivering a message. This is happening. You are going to Rome. We are already building the cage. And they came back the next day. August 4th. Then August 5th. Then August 6th. Each day brought more measurements. More questions. What clothing would she wear? What jewelry would Roman audiences recognize? Would she be placed in chains, or merely restrained? They debated these details in front of her. Argued about presentation. About visual impact. They discussed her humiliation as if it were an artistic commission. This wasn't planning. It was conditioning. Every day the architects returned, death became more tempting. And every day Octavian countered that pull with another message. Updates about her children. Caesar asked about you today. He's worried. He needs his mother. Pull her toward death with the terror of the triumph. Pull her back toward life with fear for her children. And trap her in between. Cleopatra was completely alone in that chamber. The two handmaidens who had been with her in the tomb, Iras and Charmian, were held in separate rooms. She could sometimes hear their voices, faint through the stone walls, but she was not allowed to speak to them. No one to confide in. No one to plan with. No one to share the weight of the impossible decision being forced upon her. According to Cassius Dio, Cleopatra repeatedly begged to see her children. Each request was denied. Not until Caesar is satisfied with your cooperation. But she could hear them. The palace walls were stone, and sound carried easily. Sometimes she heard the younger children playing. Laughter drifting through the narrow window, too small for anyone to climb through. Think about that kind of torment. Hearing your children nearby. Knowing they are close enough to hear, but not close enough to touch. Not knowing if the sounds are genuine or staged. Not knowing whether they are safe, or whether the sounds themselves are part of the manipulation. Modern psychology would call this learned helplessness. Strip away agency. Eliminate choice. Force dependence on the captor for even the most basic information about the people you love. Octavian executed that process with precision. By August 7th, according to Plutarch, Cleopatra stopped eating. When food was brought, she refused it. She sat alone in the chamber, silent, staring at the stone walls. The guards reported this immediately. Octavian's response was not to force her to eat. It was to bring Caesar on. For the first time in 6 days, Cleopatra saw her eldest son. The meeting was brief. Guards stood close the entire time. But Plutarch records what Caesar spoke first. Please eat, he begged his mother. Please take care of yourself. I need you. We all need you." Then the guards led him away. That night, Cleopatra ate. And that tells you everything. The danger facing her children was no longer theoretical. It now had a face, a voice, a plea. How do you choose death when your child is begging you to live? On August 8th, Octavian came in person. It was the first time he had spoken directly to Cleopatra since her capture. He arrived alone, with guards stationed just outside the door. We don't have a complete record of their conversation, but fragments remain, preserved by Plutarch, who interviewed survivors, by Cassius Dio, who had access to Roman archives, and by Strabo, who was in Alexandria shortly after these events. The offer was direct. Participate willingly in the triumph. Walk through Rome under your own power, not in chains. Keep a measure of dignity in defeat. In return, your children live. All of them, including Caesarion. They would be raised in Rome as wards of the state. Educated. Protected. Given futures. Refuse, and Caesarion dies the day you do. The younger children might survive. They might not. No guarantees were offered. Cleopatra asked for time to think. Octavian gave her 3 days. After that, we sail for Rome, with or without your cooperation. Choose. This is the brilliance of the trap. Octavian wasn't offering an escape. He was offering justification. A way for Cleopatra to convince herself that enduring humiliation served a higher purpose. That surrender was not weakness, but sacrifice, for her children. It was a lie. Octavian was never going to spare Caesarion. The boy was too dangerous. But Cleopatra didn't know that yet. For 3 days, she existed suspended between hope and despair. Then, on August 11th, 30 BC, something shifted. We don't know exactly what happened. The sources are fragmented, unclear. Something, somehow, made Cleopatra understand the truth. Maybe she overheard a careless remark from a guard. Maybe someone still loyal to her managed to pass along a warning. Maybe she simply understood Octavian well enough to see through the performance. However it happened, by August 11th Cleopatra knew Caesarion was going to die. The negotiations were theater. The promises were empty. Cooperation would change nothing. Octavian intended to kill her son regardless of her choice. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra then asked for permission to visit Antony's tomb. She said she wished to honor his memory with offerings before the journey to Rome. It was a reasonable request. Octavian agreed. She was taken to the tomb under heavy guard and allowed inside for 1 hour. The soldiers watched as she made offerings. Watched her pray. Watched her pour libations over the place where Antony had died. They did not notice her palm brushing a small clay vial hidden within the tomb's wall. They did not see her slip it into her clothing. When Cleopatra was returned to her chamber, she asked for a meal. Specifically, she requested fresh figs from the market. The guards inspected the basket carefully. They searched for weapons. For poison. For anything dangerous. They saw only fruit. They allowed it inside. This is where the story of the snake enters. The popular version claims Cleopatra hid an asp, an Egyptian cobra, among the figures. It's dramatic. Symbolic. The cobra was sacred to Egyptian royalty. But several ancient historians, including Strabo, doubted that account. The timeline doesn't align. The recorded symptoms don't clearly match cobra venom. And snakes are notoriously unreliable as instruments of suicide. What fits the evidence better is this: Cleopatra had obtained poison earlier, hidden it inside Antony's tomb during the days she was barricaded there, and retrieved it during her final visit. What followed would bring the 10 days to an end, and decide whether Cleopatra died broken or in control. The exact method matters less than what happened next. August 12th, 30 BC. Early that morning, the guards outside Cleopatra's chamber heard nothing out of the ordinary. No screams. No struggle. Only silence. Around. At the third hour, the guards opened the chamber to deliver her breakfast. Cleopatra was already dead. She lay on a golden couch, dressed in full royal regalia. Her two handmaidens were with her. Iras lay dead at the foot of the couch. Charmian was still alive, using the last of her strength to straighten the diadem on Cleopatra's head. According to Plutarch, one of the guards asked her, "Was this well done?" Charmian replied, "Perfectly fitting for a descendant of so many kings." Then she died. Cleopatra was 39 years old. This was not a suicide born of despair. It was a final assertion of control. For 10 days, Octavian had tried to break her. Tried to force her to choose life so he could march her through Rome. Tried to turn her love for her children into leverage to strip her of dignity. Her death was her refusal. Her final message. You may take my kingdom. You may erase my bloodline. But you will not take my choice. You will not parade me. You will not claim that victory. She died on her own terms. Dressed as a queen. Surrounded by the symbols of power Octavian had worked so carefully to strip away. But here lies the final cruelty. Octavian won anyway. He could not parade the real Cleopatra, so he created a replacement. A statue. An effigy. During his triumph in Rome, a massive image of Cleopatra, with a snake affixed to her arm, was carried through the streets. The Roman crowd saw her defeated. Saw her reduced to the image Octavian wanted them to remember. The propaganda worked. The version of Cleopatra as the exotic Eastern seductress who died by snakebite became the story that survived for 2,000 years. And Caesarion, the child Cleopatra believed she might save, was murdered 3 weeks later. Octavian sent assassins to intercept him as he fled toward India. Julius Caesar's only biological son, 17 years old, was killed on a road in the Egyptian desert. The younger children survived. They were paraded in Octavian's triumph in place of their mother. Raised in Rome as wards of Octavian's sister. Watched closely. Given limited futures. Never allowed to return to Egypt. Cleopatra died believing her sacrifice might protect them. Believing that choosing the manner of her death over participation in Octavian's spectacle was an act of dignity. In reality, Octavian got everything he wanted. The propaganda victory. The elimination of rivals. The conquest of Egypt. Control of the story. Cleopatra's death brought nothing except the way she died. And that is what those 10 days reveal about power at its most systematic. Octavian didn't just want to defeat Cleopatra. He wanted to dismantle her psychologically first. To turn her love for her children into a weapon against her will. To construct an impossible choice, dignity or children, and force her to live inside it. To measure her for humiliation. To show her, in exact detail, what awaited her in Rome. To offer false hope that cooperation might preserve what mattered most. It was a machine. Every element calculated. Every pressure point identified. Every moment designed to strip away agency until surrender felt reasonable. And when it failed, when Cleopatra chose death anyway, Octavian simply paraded an image instead. That is real power. Not the ability to kill, but the ability to control the narrative, even when your enemy denies you. If this exposes something unsettling about how ancient power functioned, how victory was never enough, enemies had to be broken first, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We'll continue uncovering how systematic destruction shaped the ancient world. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Was Cleopatra's final choice a victory? A defeat? Or both? Stand in Alexandria today. The tomb where Cleopatra died is gone. The palace where she spent her final 10 days lies underwater, lost to earthquakes and time. All that remains are the stories, and the question. She chose death over humiliation. Yet her image was paraded anyway. She died to protect her children. Yet Caesarion was killed. She controlled the manner of her death, but not the story that followed. Those 10 days, from August 1st to August 12th, reveal something essential about power and agency. Sometimes the only choice left is how you lose. Sometimes dignity costs everything and buys nothing except the knowledge that the choice was still yours. Cleopatra died a queen, alone in a sealed stone room, accompanied only by 2 loyal handmaidens. She failed to save her kingdom. Failed to save her children. Succeeded only in denying Octavian the satisfaction of parading her living body through Rome. Whether that was enough, whether it mattered at all, is the question echoing across 2,000 years. Remember those 10 days. Remember what Octavian built. A psychological machine designed to break the last pharaoh of Egypt before her death. Remember how close it came to succeeding. And remember why Cleopatra chose death anyway. Not because it saved anything, but because it was the only choice Octavian could not take from her. That is what her final days were. Not romance. Not legend. Just the systematic destruction of agency, and one woman's refusal to let it be complete.